Hello everyone, this is Donnie, aka Elevated with Dota Alchemy, and thank you for tuning in again today. I know that you're probably watching a lot of TI right now, so we really do appreciate you also watching our content at the same time. And today's video is just going to be a sort of overview on a series that I'm going to be making over the next few weeks called The Fundamentals of Playing Better Dota. And I wanted to just kind of talk about what you would want to develop in yourself as a Dota player to really reach that next level. And these are sort of the 10 steps that will make you a better Dota player if you put a little bit of focus and time into improving each one of these things. Each one of these 10 steps will likely get its own video on dotaalchemy.com, so be sure to check out the site if you haven't already and look for these videos in the coming weeks. I'll be working on them especially once I get back from TI, but I'll likely be writing some of the scripts for the videos at TI itself during my downtime. So let's just get right into the video. Step number 1, being honest with yourself and what your motivation is to play the game. I think that this is the best place to start when we're looking at a list because it really helps to understand what your motivation is for doing things before you do them. And that can help you kind of dictate the approach that you have to learning the game and playing the game. I think that a lot of us are kind of caught in this weird gray area because video games have historically been sort of just a leisure activity. And with a game like Dota, it has a very, very high skill cap and competitive side to it. I think that a lot of people are kind of confused as to why they're playing the game. And I don't mean that you're confused in a conventional sense. It's just kind of confusing to play something that you would normally not take seriously, but you find yourself taking it seriously. And that kind of makes, I don't know for everybody, but for myself, sometimes I find myself thinking, why do I care so much about this game? For me, as an example, I use Dota 2 as a competitive outlet. I've played sports my whole life. I played college sports, so I played at a fairly high level. I've always liked the competitive nature of sports. And for Dota, and I've played other competitive games before in sort of like a semi-esports environment like MLG Halo and a few other games. And I've always been interested in the ladders and the comparing myself in the rankings of these games that I've played. So for me, Dota is really my competitive outlet, and it also allows me to kind of measure myself and my ability to think on my feet and adapt and quickly come up with solutions to problems. So it's almost like a measure of intelligence to some extent. And so I tend to take the game quite seriously just because I am investing all of this time in it, and I'm investing a lot of my creativity and effort into being good at the game. Now, that isn't necessarily the motivation for everybody, and that's why it's important to understand what your own personal motivation is for playing the game. It's frustrating to make mistakes because I demand a very high level of competitiveness from myself, and therefore I also expect that from my teammates, which I don't always get. I understand at some level that my teammates are not necessarily going to compete as hard as I'm going to compete, but that's still frustrating for me. And knowing that that is going to be frustrating for me can help me sort of deal with that situation. Step number 2, defining your playstyle and choosing a role or roles. All of us have a different approach to the game and different ideas of how Dota should be played, and we all have different ways of approaching the game. Some people like to play aggressively, some people like to farm, some people don't really know how they like to play and they just kind of do things. And so if you can spend a little time understanding how you enjoy playing the game and what you like to do and how you think the game should be played, then this will help you not only communicate with your team, but also help you form a hero pool of heroes that enable this kind of playstyle. For me personally, I like to play very aggressively all the time. I want to push the tempo of the game. I want to try and end games quickly. I want to have control over when we take fights and towers. And so I tend to play Ursa, Bloodseeker, Pugna, these kinds of heroes that allow me to basically dictate the pace of the game. So if you can define what your playstyle is, or like at least some aspects of the playstyle that you want to be playing in most of your games, then you can keep that in mind and avoid the trap that I think a lot of people fall into, which is you're at the picking screen and you don't really have a plan, and you kind of think, Oh, well, maybe that would be a good hero, and I've seen that picked in the pro games, so maybe I should pick that. Whereas it might not fit your playstyle, and you might just be picking it because you don't really have a good understanding of how you want to play the game. Step number 3 is to build your hero pool, and this comes right after that step number 2 of understanding what type of game you want to play. To build your hero pool, you should definitely try a wide variety of heroes, and keeping in mind the way that you want to play, figure out which ones best fit the way that you want to play the game. I would suggest that you pick 3 or 4 heroes and just kind of focus on those initially. And then step number 4 in this process is to expand your hero pool. And this can be whether you're expanding the way that you approach the game, whether you start implementing some heroes that are maybe less aggressive, for example, or less farm oriented, or more team fight oriented, depending on what you might be lacking, because versatility is really, really important in Dota players, and having the ability to play many different styles will make you a more successful player in the long run. So number 3 is something that you might already kind of have, but it's still good to look at the hero pool that you have, and you can go on Dota Buff or even just look in your profile and see what heroes you're playing a lot, which ones you're winning a lot with, and then maybe kind of consolidate those heroes into the ones that you're most successful with if your goal is to gain MMR. As far as expanding my hero pool, I like to focus on heroes that are sort of related to how I want to play the game. So if I like playing aggressively, but I'm not super familiar with a hero like Drow Ranger, that's still a pretty good option for me because I like to, be able to push towers and fight early and that kind of thing. So then I would take a couple heroes at a time. I wouldn't try and just add all of the heroes to my hero pool. I would focus on one at a time and maybe play 10 or 15 games of that hero, decide whether it actually fits my play style, and then maybe start watching some replays or breaking down my own games and figuring it out from there. Step number 5 is actually pressing play Dota. And this might sound very simple. Of course, you just click the play Dota button. But there's been a lot of research that shows that the approach that you have before doing an activity has a lot of effect on how you actually do that activity. So when I say pressing play Dota, I'm talking about the process that you go through before you actually click the button to get into a game. So this might be something physical. It might be like warming up with the last hit trainer, or going to demo lobby and practicing some spell combos on heroes that you're planning on playing. Or it could be something like setting yourself up mentally, whether that's through meditation or maybe even reading the patch notes if there's a new patch or you haven't played the game in a while. All these little things can help you become more comfortable before you actually get into the game, and playing the game from a position of comfort is going to be extremely beneficial to your success in the long term. Step number 6 is practicing good rules of communication and avoiding toxicity. Communication is an inseparable part of playing Dota 2, and despite it being called solo queue, communication is 100% the fastest way to climb MMR if you practice good communication habits, and avoid being toxic. Good communication can be a little bit hard to define because you have 4 different people on your team that you need to communicate with, and each person might take in information and receive it and give it in different ways. But as a general rule of thumb, just think about how you're talking to your teammates and think about whether that mode of communication would be effective for you. That's generally a good baseline, is use yourself as an example. If I was communicating with myself this way, would I enjoy that? Or would I get enough information out of that kind of communication? And we'll have a whole communication guide coming out on DotaAlchemy.com talking about the various ways that you can communicate and various communication habits and exercises that you can go through to improve your communication. And this is stuff that will be applicable to any sort of team activity you might do in your entire life. Step number 7 is, how do you deal with mistakes? Mistakes are going to happen in a game like Dota 2. It's a very high pressure environment. There's so much stuff going on. People are always messing up. No matter what your skill level is, there's always going to be some mistakes happening. And how you deal with these mistakes and how you deal with the disappointment of losing is something that you are going to have to learn if you want to get better at Dota 2 and enjoy the game in the long term. So whether this is resetting yourself between matches so you don't tilt, whether this is shaking off missing a last hit so you don't miss more of them, whether this is planning your team fight after a lost team fight to better approach it and not make the same mistakes twice. There are so many different ways that you can deal with mistakes in a positive way, and this is an area that I think most people can drastically improve both their experience and enjoyment of the game very quickly just by focusing on. Step number 8 is looking at the short term versus the long term. I think that a lot of people are very attached to the short term win, loss, plus 25, minus 25 relationship that we have with matchmaking. And in general, video games have always kind of just been this short escape experience that we can boot up and get into at any time during the day. And so if you are attached to this short term, then you might experience a little bit more frustration if things go poorly in that 1 or 2 games that you get to play during the day. Over the long term, Dota is something that you can develop, you can grow as a player, and as we've seen, this game has been around for many years at this point and has continually evolved, and players have continually gotten better because they have just approached the game with a long-term mindset. Losing a tough game may be hard to stomach in the short term, but if you learn some good lessons from that, then your long-term game will benefit heavily from that. You might not ever make those mistakes again, or it might be something significant enough to make you a much better player over the next couple of months. So keeping everything in perspective is really, really important. Step number 9 is a winning mindset. And this kind of goes hand in hand with step number 8 and even step number 5 before you play Dota. A winning mindset is something that you're going to have to develop. A winning mindset is basically being able to deal with adversity in a good way, being able to push through hard games, being able to think on your feet and adapt when things are not going your way. The thing about Dota is that anybody can look good if they have outdrafted their opponents, or they have good support, or the matchup is just favoring them in one way or another. It's very easy to win easy games. It's very hard to win difficult games, and that might sound very obvious, but I think that there's kind of an extra hurdle that you need to get over if you are trying to come back in a game, especially because a lot of the time your teammates will be very quick to kind of negatively look at a game and say, all right, what's the point of even trying at this point? So if you're in a situation like that, it's still totally possible to win the game, but you need to have that mindset of being able to look for opportunities even in tough situations. There might be less of them, it might be much harder to capitalize on them, but if you can continually look for those opportunities, regardless of how far behind you are, you give yourself a chance to win games. Even if you're just winning one extra game every 100, that can be a huge difference in your long-term win rate. And step number 10 is something that I think is very important to me personally. It has helped me shape the way that I approach the game over the last few months in a very drastic way to how I used to look at the game. I look at Dota as a tool for personal development. There's a lot of skills that you have to employ while you're playing Dota 2 that are applicable to various other areas of your life. You're going to communicate with people in life, you're going to have to work with people, you're going to have to solve problems, you're going to have to persevere and deal with adversity. You're going to have to learn to accept that people are going to have different perspectives than you and work with them anyway. And sometimes you're even going to have to learn to lose graciously. And that is a huge deal for people with very competitive mindsets like myself. I'm not a good loser, and I'll admit that straight up. But when I look at Dota as a way for me to practice things like this, things that I could get better at in my personal life, I find that the investment of playing games of Dota, and Dota is a high investment game. You know, every game takes 45 minutes to an hour to go through the entire cycle of queuing and drafting and playing the entire game. So it's not something that necessarily feels good to put a lot of time into if you're not getting something back. And so I think a lot of people are very attached, myself included in the past, have been very attached to the MMR and what that says about you and your skill level. But if you can think about it in a slightly different way and realize that you're actually being given the opportunity to spend an hour focusing on things that will benefit you long term in your life that you might have as weaknesses, the investment of playing a game of Dota doesn't seem like that big of a deal, because you would need to do these things anyway. And you can actually do it through a method and through a medium that you enjoy playing in and gives you other forms of reward as well. So like I said, I will be trying to go into each one of these steps with much greater detail in its own video on Dota Alchemy. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thanks as always for watching. We really appreciate your support. I hope you're enjoying the International, and I hope that I'll even see some of you in Vancouver later this week. Good luck, have fun, and we will see you next time.